Okay, so we are on page 6 in our first social studies magazine, America 1492. Last time we talked about the sea people of the Pacific Northwest. Today we're going to start by talking about the peoples of the desert Southwest. And you guys remember that our question we're trying to answer has to do with where do these people get their resources and how does where they live, their environment, affect how they live? So we're going to get started. Voices should be off. Some of you are close to getting a check already. All right, we're going to start at the top of page 6. Follow along with me. Peoples of the desert Southwest. Little rain falls in the Southwest. Some parts are desert, the rest is very dry. When the rain does come, it often pours down in short, strong thunderstorms that cause flash floods. So you guys, a flash flood is like a sudden flood. There isn't a lot of warning. This climate doesn't seem like a very good place for people, especially for farmers. Yet Native Americans of the Southwest were expert farmers, growing crops of corn, beans, squash, and cotton. The Hopi were one group of Pueblo people living in the Southwest in 1492. Like some other Pueblo peoples, they lived in multi-story buildings or houses. These were built on the tops of mesas, high flat-topped hills. They were also built on the sides of cliffs. Put on your hiking boots and climb the long, winding stone stairway to the top of the mesa. The people of the Pueblo are waiting there to meet you. So you guys, on page 6, do you see how there's like that little map and part of it is green? Do you see that? That green part, that is the Southwest where these Native Americans would live, the Hopi would live. So next to our map, we have a caption. Let's read that one. It says, Pueblo peoples lived in the area we now call the Southwest. The Hopi made their home in what is now northeastern Arizona. The Hopi traded with other peoples, including those of Mexico. Some of the things they traded for were parrot feathers, copper, and turquoise. Silently raise your hand if you've been to or around Arizona before. Silently raise your hand. All right, go ahead, put your hands down. So that's around where they lived. Next to that caption, it says this Hopi woman was photographed in 1906. She wears the ancient squash blossom hairstyle of her people. Women wore it when they were old enough to get married. So you guys will notice that when we talk about a lot of these Native American cultures, when children would reach a certain age, it was considered them now being an adult, and certain things would change. Like they would wear their hair a different way, or their clothing would be different. So when they reach a certain age in these different cultures, they usually then are transitioning into adulthood. The Hopi women made the pottery and baskets they used as trays, serving platters and corn containers. Some bowls had a snake design on them. The snake was a symbol of lightning and rain. Why would these people want to paint a snake? If it represents lightning and rain, and they live in the Southwest, why would they want to paint a snake? What would they maybe hope is going to happen by painting that snake? Chanel?
If they get lightning or rain, the rain can provide them water.
Yes. You guys, you'll notice or you'll find there are symbols that will represent certain things. So in the Hopi culture, a snake represents lightning and rain. In the beginning, didn't it say that the Southwest is usually very dry and desert-like? So do you think these people really like it when it rains? Yes. So they will use that snake symbol to kind of encourage it to rain as a symbol of good fortune. All right, next to that. Southwestern corn comes in 6 colors. For the Hopi, yellow corn stood for the north, blue corn for the west, red corn for the south, and white corn for the east. Purple corn stood for the sky, and gray corn for the underworld. The Hopi ate corn at every meal. Popcorn was a Hopi treat. So, popcorn may have come from this culture. So we have them to thank for our popcorn that we like to eat during like movies. Allison. It's just how it's grown. So you know how there's like for tomatoes, for example, there are lots of different types of tomatoes and different like names of tomatoes, and so they grow a little bit differently. It's probably like that. They're all kind of different kinds of corn. What? Yeah, like apples. That's a better one. You have like Honeycrisp apples, Golden Delicious apples, Granny Smith, all that. Frankie.
If they wouldn't have found out popcorn, I wouldn't have got popcorn in my locker.
Yep, exactly. I gave you guys popcorn for a welcome back night. Yep. All right, let's go on to the next caption, you guys. Kachinas were powerful spirits that played a big part in the lives of the Hopi. People wearing different Kachina masks gave prayers to the Kachina spirits for good harvests. Hopi girls were given dolls that were carved and dressed to look like Kachinas. These dolls helped the children learn about the different Kachina spirits.
Cool.
Yeah, it is cool. And so, again, since this is a different culture, they have different religious beliefs from us. And so they believed in spirits called Kachinas, and they would pray to them in kind of the way that sometimes we pray to God, asking for like good fortune or, please keep my loved ones safe. They would pray to the Kachinas instead. And so the dolls represented different Kachina spirits. It's kind of like how we talk about different saints and we learn about different saints. They learn about different Kachinas. Now, before we move on to page 7, if we look down by the person here, kind of bent over, maybe farming, maybe gathering something, there is a caption. It says, "On this day, one of the men is looking to see how well his young corn plants are growing. In a Hopi village, men did most of the farming." So if you were to look out at the farmland, it would be mostly men out there. All right, let's look at page 7. And we're going to start with the caption next to the picture with the bright red background. Well, let's read about it. It says, "Most pueblos stood 2 or 3 stories high. The bottom floors had no doors or windows, so attackers couldn't get in. People could enter these rooms only through a hole in the roof or in the floor above. Pueblos were made of stone that was covered with sun-baked clay called adobe. There were 75 to 600 or more rooms in a village. As new people came, builders simply added new rooms to the old ones. So they built them to where they could always be expanding them."
That's smart.
Yeah, it is smart. You guys, it's great that you love to find new sounds to make with your mouths, but I would appreciate it if you would stop in the middle of my class. Thank you. All right, our next caption to the right says, "The Hopi society is matrilineal." That means people trace their ancestry through their mother's families. So you guys, you know how in our culture, if a man and a woman get married, usually the woman will take the man's last name. And so a lot of family histories can be traced more easily through the man's or the father's like lineage and ancestry. Well, in their culture, they actually trace it through the woman's or the mother's ancestry. And so it's different, yeah. Several families would form clans. The oldest woman is the leader of daily life. Her brother is the leader of ceremonies and rituals, and each pueblo had a kiva, a special underground room that only men and boys could enter. Secret ceremonies were held in the kiva. Yeah? Well, as I'm sure you guys have realized, as we've learned about past history, in most cultures, men were given more privileges than women. And that's why as we evolved, women said, hey, we are equal to men, and so we deserve to have the same rights. So yeah, when we go back in time, we do learn about customs that are different from what we have today. Yeah, which I mean, I still love cooking, but I also like teaching. And if we went back in time, I may not have been allowed to be a teacher. So, okay. Yeah, that too. Let's look down at the bottom of page 7, you guys. Waiting for your voices. Awesome. All right. The Hopi practiced what is called dry farming. They captured every bit of water available. One of the ways they did this was to plant seeds deep in sand that had rock beneath it. As the plant grew, its roots soaked up water left in the ground from rains or flash floods. The rock kept the water from draining away. So because they lived in such a dry climate, they had to get really creative with their farming. Here in Minnesota, we have really good soil and we can grow things pretty easily. But you go to the Southwest, Max, put your mask on appropriately. When you go down to the Southwest, their soil is very dry, and that's because they don't get a lot of rain. So they had to develop a system where they could retain the moisture in the soil to grow things. So by putting the rock in there, it helped keep the moisture in the ground for their plants to grow and thrive and produce whatever it is they were growing. So that they were pretty inventive with that in that respect. Are there questions about the peoples of the desert Southwest at all? Zoe.
I have a question. Did they have to cut their hair? Because if they did, then wouldn't they be like really long if they didn't?
Well, it looks like on the picture, page 6, and on page 7, it looks like both of the men have longer hair. They may have cut it. It's kind of like how the last group we talked about, they could make like spears out of like rocks. They probably could sharpen a rock and use that to cut their hair if they wanted to. I'm not sure, like 100% sure if they didn't cut their hair, if they did. Allison. I would say it sounds like this group of Native Americans mainly farmed, but I'm sure they also did have some animals that they hunted. Yep. It's just that because of where they lived, they primarily would farm. Okay, so our first group, they lived near the sea, so that's where they would get most of their resources. Our Hopi group, they are in the desert Southwest, so they would farm and use those kinds of resources because of where they lived. All right, let's move on to page 8. Maybe. It didn't say in here, but I bet you could go home and search it. Yeah. Ready to rock.
Ready to roll.
All right, you guys. Next up, we have the farmers of the Great Plains. Follow along with me on the left there, on the white pane. The western Great Plains is a flat, dry area. Tall grasses once grew everywhere there. In 1492, high winds whipped across the plains carrying dirt or the flames of fast-moving lightning fires. Winters were very cold, but summers sizzled. More rain fell in the eastern parts of the Great Plains. 500 years ago, few Native Americans lived all year on the Great Plains. Many peoples were nomadic, which means they were following buffalo herds. They hunted on the plains in warm weather, but wintered in the mountains or woodlands that bordered the plains. One group that did live on the plains was the Mandan people. The women raised corn, squash, beans, and sunflowers. The men hunted bear, deer, rabbits, and other animals, which are some of the animals some of you probably hunt if you hunt with your families. Their most important prey was the buffalo, which grazed in the tall grasses. Every spring and fall, the Mandan tracked the buffalo across the plains. One hunt has already started. Clouds of dust are rising in the distance. A buffalo herd must be near. Let's catch up with these hunters from long ago. So again, at the bottom, we have another map, and it kind of shows us where the Mandan people resided or lived. So it says the Mandan lived along the banks of the Missouri River in present-day North Dakota. Plains culture stretched from Alberta, Canada, to the Texas Panhandle. The Mandan traded vegetables and other goods with the nomadic plains peoples who did not grow their own food. So our groups who would live in the plains, they would grow food and then trade it to people who didn't grow their own food. All right, up top. Waiting for our voices to be off so that you're ready to follow along with me. All right. So the Mandan lived in large domed houses called earth lodges. Have you guys ever heard of those before? Yeah, me either. A rounded frame of branches was covered with earth to keep the lodge warm in winter and cool in the summer. Some lodges housed several families and their animals. Women owned the lodges. When a Mandan man married, he moved into his wife's lodge. Each Mandan village had its own government. There was a general council, and 2 members were chosen for special leadership. One was a skilled warrior, the other had skills for keeping the peace. Another member took care of day-to-day governing. You guys, why would it be important to have one person who's good at kind of like war and then one person who's good at peace? Why would it be important to have both of those in your governing system? Turn and talk with the people next to you. Why is that important? All right, who can raise their hand and give me an answer? Why is it important to both have someone in charge of peace and someone in charge of war helping to govern together? Why is that so important? Max.
That the warrior protects them
Mm-hmm.
from other people and wild animals.
Yep.
And then unicorns like that people. So then if you don't have them, then everyone can go warrior and crazy and
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So if you didn't hear Max, he said that it's important to have someone who knows war to protect them from other people and from animals. But then it's also important to have someone who's peaceful to kind of keep the peace within your community. Awesome. Eosius.
So that if there was a war gonna happen, the peace guy could try to make it a peace. And if that didn't work, then warrior could
Yes, that's another good point. If you had a group you disagreed with, you could have the person who's in charge of peace try to find a peaceful resolution first, because we always want peace before war. And then if they couldn't find a peaceful resolution, then the person in charge who's more knowledgeable of war then could help step up and take over. Chanel.
if you have someone who is like the feisty as the tough one.
Yep.
Like if there was like a very like if there's 2 different owners of 2 different communities
Mm-hmm.
and those 2 people had something against each other, you have the feisty who could fight, and if things were to get too serious,
Mm-hmm.
you have the peacemaker who could make peace and find a way for them to solve the problem that they are having.
Exactly. Those peacemakers can be more of a problem solver. Yep. All right, you guys, I'm going to ask that you sit in your desk because there's just way too much side conversation going on, so I need everyone in their desk. So off of the floor, at your desk, please. Drew, let's go. All right, so it's kind of interesting to learn that they kind of had a government, right? Because how many of you, when you think of Native Americans, would instantly think of having a government? Okay, so we learn here, what? Well, it says here that they did, or governing. They probably have a different word for it, but it's essentially similar to what we call a government. So, you guys, it's very important to remember when we think of Native Americans that some of the things that we do now are based off of things that they did then. Elena, go ahead. Yes, Max. Yep. So they probably did. Yeah, they probably did call it a government or whatever would be equivalent to that word in their language. Okay, the next one says, early summer, the Mandan held a 4-day celebration called, I think it's Okipa. I think that's how you say it. Men wearing buffalo skins and masks did dances that copied the movements of the animals they hunted. Older people told stories of the Mandan past, and young men took part in tests of strength and courage. So remember how we talked about in a lot of these cultures when boys and girls would reach a certain age and they're considered adults? Remember that? So I bet that celebration has to do with when boys reached that age where then they were considered men in their culture. Yes, Will.
Um, never mind.
Are you sure? Okay. Are there any other questions before we move on? Zoe?
Like how when you turn 13, you're like a teenager, and then when you're 18, you're an adult.
Exactly. They had certain benchmarks like that the way that we do. And like when you're 4, then you're not necessarily a toddler anymore. So like going through those kinds of things. Yeah. So they had certain benchmarks with age too. Okay, we're going to come down to the bottom where we have a box that actually goes onto both pages, that tan box. So follow along with me. Underneath the picture, it says Buffalo Dancer. And so for a second, I want you to just take a look at that picture. Yeah, take a look at the picture. All right, now let's read about it. It's early fall. The Mandan are on the plains hunting buffalo. On this day, they're using a plan called a buffalo jump. Wearing a buffalo skin as a disguise, the hunt leader walks ahead of the herd, trying to lead it toward a cliff's edge. Other hunters walk behind the herd. When the leader gives a signal, all the hunters stamp their feet, make loud noises, and wave torches to frighten the buffalo. The scared animals run straight over the edge of the cliff and fall to their death.
That is so
Buffalo hunters, let's keep reading. Buffalo hunters, Jack. Buffalo hunters use dogs to carry supplies. The goods were placed on a pack made of a small skin frame tied to 2 poles. One end of each pole was tied to the dog's shoulders. The other ends trailed on the ground. Dogs could carry up to 75 pounds on the frame, but they could also decide to run away to chase rabbit. So, you guys, what's very important to keep in mind when we learn about the hunting habits of these groups? Is it modern day? No. Do they have as much resources as we do for food? No. So they would have to find things that would work because in their minds, you guys, it's like in in winter, is it easy to hunt in winter all the time? No, especially we know that they are now in what's North Dakota. North Dakota has harsh winters like we do to where it gets so cold you can't really go outside and be safe. They needed to hunt enough during the summer months to be able to store food for winter. So they had to come up with methods that would work for them to be able to feed their entire community. So what sounds like kind of mean to us, that was kind of how they survived and were able to live. So it's very important to kind of keep that mindset when we read about this. Okay? All right. And no, that's okay. When we read about it, yeah, it can shock you. That's okay. We're not used to it. But it's just important to kind of put it in that kind of frame of mind. They're doing this to survive. Okay, last caption box up on page 9. What does that look like a picture of, 5th grade? Raise your hand. Raise your hand at the top of page 9, at the corner. What does that look like to you? Emmy, what does that look like?
It looks like kind of like a water source.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people like getting on their boats and like ready to travel. Want to travel somewhere.
Okay, it looks like they're traveling to somewhere. What else? What else? Allison?
I see that they're inside a building and inside cliff and they're getting to the middle.
Yeah, there's kind of some buildings up on the cliff, and then we can see they're kind of in circular or canoe-like boats. Max? You see a person? Awesome. I see that person too. Jack.
It looks like the boats are like giant planchas, and it looks like there's something that they're hunting inside the boat.
Oh, so you think they're in the boats to hunt. Okay. Addie?
I see two people.
You see two people. Yep. There's one in each boat. Oh, wait. Oh, you're talking about right there? Yep. That might be another person. You're right. Yep. Village, the water. Okay. Let's read about it. The Mandan used buffalo hides to make bull boats for river travel. They did this by stretching the hides over a tub-shaped framework of willow tree branches. A bull boat could carry several people. Now, just because this caption didn't mention hunting, does it mean they don't hunt from these boats? Not necessarily. They might hunt from these boats. I mean, they kind of live around where we do. We fish all the time up here, so they probably fish too. They may have sometimes used the bull boats for fishing as well, or hunting. I want you to turn and talk to the people around you. How does living in the Great Plains affect the way the Mandan live? And how does living in the desert Southwest affect the way the Hopi people live? Turn and talk. I did. 3 people are at the bathroom right now, and one of them comes back again. These ones are the Madonna, and then the first one is the
They had no, they were the ones who they
Ready to rock. Ready to rock. Ready to roll. Awesome. Jack L. Yeah, hi. Trying to get the class's attention. Is that okay with you? Thanks. All right, so I was hearing some people talking about how since the Hopi people lived in a drier climate, they farmed. Raise your hand if you or your partner talked about that, about the farming of the Hopi people. That was the first group we talked about. Okay. Raise your hand if your group talked about how the Mandan did more hunting because they lived in the Great Plains. Raise your hand if you or your group talked about that. Okay. Does anyone else have anything else to add to that? Senna. Yep, they live near rivers, the Mandan people, so they have water. What else? Addie?
The Hopi people, they thought snakes were lucky, but now we think they're very bad because they were venomous. Me and Allison were saying, why didn't they just kill all the snakes?
Well, that's kind of what's interesting about cultures, you guys. In certain cultures, things can be seen as lucky, whereas in other cultures, it might be something you're afraid of. So, like snakes, in the Hopi culture, are considered a good thing. But in, like, maybe our culture, American culture, people are afraid of snakes. Yep. Frankie.
My group talked about
Yeah. Yeah, how they hunted buffalo? Yes, definitely. And there was tons of buffalo during this time. Awesome. I'm really glad your group talked about that. Philip, that's okay. Will,
I was talking about like how for the second one where they live near the water that in winter if the water's frozen they can just keep up snow and let it melt.
yeah, that's very true. Our Madan people, since they live in the plains, it would snow, and during the winters, they could scoop up snow and melt it for water. You're absolutely right. Philip, do you remember what you were going to say?
In this culture, four birds are lucky, right?
And wait, say that again.
In this culture, four-leaf clovers are lucky.
Maybe. I think in a lot of cultures, actually, four-leaf clovers are lucky. So in this culture, they very well may be too. So yeah, in our culture, it's lucky. Zoe, did you have something?
Do they drink or do they only give their water to their plants?
No, they drink water too. But you're right. They'd have to split it up. They'd have to water their plants, but then also conserve some for themselves. Allison, put it in the joke of the day. So don't say it, but put it in the joke of the day. Okay? Yeah, we can do riddles. That works. Definitely. Max. Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yep. You're totally right. They had to be ingenious with how they got their water and their food. Frankie, yeah, you can go ahead, dude. All right.